Hi everyone, today I'll be painting Vizzik Skour. So unfortunately I'm a bit sick when recording this video, so I might sound like I've got Nurgle's plague, but I'll try my best to sound clear and appealing. So first off, I'm using purple for the skin. As you notice, he doesn't have a head and there's certain parts of him that are missing. This is very important, especially for this mini. He needs to be sub-assembled. So now I use grey brown and I basically just dry brush this from above. I forgot to mention, for my Skaven videos I usually use airbrush for painting the skin, but I thought it'd be quite interesting to show you guys how I would go about painting a model of any size. Actually, I've used this on smaller models and big models and medium models, and it's fine. It takes a bit longer than airbrushing, but I just wanted to show you it's still possible. So you just go through all the areas that you've painted purple now, and you just dry brush it. It can be quite thick as well. It can be a thick dry brush where there's a bit of paint on it. And I'm also doing it on the wood as well, because I'm thinking, as I'm doing this, I'm thinking to use the slap chop technique just to experiment and see how it works. So now I'm using decomposed flesh. So this is the lighter tone, so I'm going to give him a nice sickly, diseased, pale skin complexion. And again, I'm just going to dry brush all the parts I dry brushed earlier. So as I keep dry brushing, the paint will eventually start to fade away and there won't be much left on the brush. That's when I start to use it on the clothes now. I just had an idea, because I mentioned earlier about the slap chop technique. I thought, hey, maybe I can save some time here with the highlighting part of the cape, of the robe, whatever it is, the clothing, and just try dry brushing it with this decomposed flesh, because it's quite light already. You may use an even brighter color as well if you really want to get those edge highlights popping once you use the next step, which is the slap chop technique. For the slap chop technique, it's usually you dry brush and then you just use contrast paints from Citadel paints. So now I'm using iron rack skin. I'm experimenting again. I'm using many different types of like the paints I'm using are quite similar, and I'm just dry brushing them on. I'm experimenting with like how they look. Are they too bright? Are they similar? So maybe you can also learn from this video too, and any mistakes I make, you won't make them, which is great, right? So I just go over the whole model again with this iron rack flesh. I even go over the beard, and for the base as well, I'll have a separate video on how I made the base. It's pretty simple, to be honest. So now I test fit it. I pull it onto the base and see how it looks. Now I use deepkin flesh. Again, I'm experimenting with different colors that are very similar. So now I thought, oh, maybe I'll try like a grey seer type of skin color. So I started to like dab the fur, but it didn't really work, but it was fine. It added some interesting texture, so it's not ruined, it's just experimenting. So this is how it looks. You can still see a lot of the purple, but don't worry, we'll get rid of that later. So I'm using this ink from Liquitex. And to be honest, you can just use contrast paints if you don't have access to this ink, but I highly recommend it. It's really, they're fantastic to use and they have so many colors. So it's Liquitex ink, and I think if you're using Games Workshop Citadel contrast paints, Sigvald Burgundy would be a good one to use. It's very similar to this. I probably would have used that if I didn't use this ink. And then what I do, I fill it down with lots of water, like so much water. And then I just go over some areas where I feel would be bruised or to add some discoloration. And what happens then, I come back to it, I dry the brush, and then I soak up the excess water and paint and just move it around the model into the creases or over areas of interest. So while that's drying, I'll use Rakarth Flesh to dry brush again over the base now. So I focus mainly on the stone areas, but I also start dry brushing the wooden parts of the... It looks like a ship. It must be a ship, right? Because I think in the trailer they're coming out of the sea, out of the ocean. So I just dry brush everything on this, and then I start also dry brushing the cracked floor as well. So I now paint Skeleton Horde over the wooden areas, but I also start to use it over the rock areas, the stone monuments, terrain sticking out the ground. And it's okay to thin it down a bit as well, and then just go over the whole model and just let it spread, because you want it to be uneven and you still want to see some of the grey showing through. Garrick Sewers, it's a perfect contrast paint. I use this in so many of my videos for painting wood, stone floors, well not stone, like dirt. I also water it down and then use it as like a wash over like stone areas, just to get them ready for the next step. It's a really great paint to use. I found like Wildwood is, you know, it's got wood in the name, but it's just too dark. Especially if you're doing slap chop. If you're doing slap chop, I recommend Garrick Sewers. So now I'm using this grey brown, and I'm just going over the whole model and trying to tone down the purple areas. I still want some purple, but not. It's a bit heavy in like the armpit, where the neck is. But I found out later you won't really see much of the neck, so I spent a lot of time on this part for. Well, I guess I will know it's painted. I guess no one else will, unless they didn't. Unless they watch the video, then they will know. And I just paint the whole face, the body, anywhere there's flesh. And I even had some left over on my brush, and lots of water, as you can see. I just went over the cloak just to make it a bit dirty. So now I use Luminous Flesh. So everything else is drying now. So now I dry brush the fabric on the 2 armor pieces. Then I use Decayed Metal, and I just paint over the armor and trying to be very careful. You may want to do this part in reverse, like you may want to do the fabric first and then you do the armor, but it's up to you. So I just cover all the metallic areas with this color now, Decayed Metal. It's a really good paint from scale 75. I also use it a lot too when I want to add some dark golds or brass. Decomposed Flesh again. So this recently I found that is a really nice color for dry brushing stone. It's a really nice color. Just, you know, it's called Decomposed Flesh, but it's far from flesh. It's actually very cool looking, like a stone effect, and you can even dry brush it thick, doesn't have to be too thin. And then also there's not too much on my brush, I will dry brush the wood as well, and that really has a nice effect too. So now everything's all dry, you know, all that brown I've done earlier. I'm starting to use my favorite paint and going over all the hair, all the tufts. It takes some time, and sometimes you might make some mistakes, but what you can do, you can kind of freehand little hairs. That can help too, but there'll be another step later that can correct those mistakes. I use decomposed flesh now to dry brush the skin once more, but this time the paint isn't that thick. There's barely any paint on the brush, and what I do, I use this now to go over all the hair. And what I found was, because I was painting the ogres in another video, the hair wasn't looking right, it looked a bit flat, and as soon as I did this little dry brush over the whole model, everything tied together, and there's some areas where I made some mistakes with the brown paint. What this dry brush did, it kind of tied it with the skin, so it worked out pretty well. So now I'm using dry brush again. I'm using the purple color to go over the cloak, because I felt the slap chop technique I did earlier was not strong enough, like it wasn't popping. So I thought I would just try lightly dry brushing some purple over the raised areas mainly. However, there's still some of that decomposed flesh still on the brush. So in a strange way, it looks kind of cool because it's all dirty, but you might want to be careful. Now I'm using a deep purple, which is just a lighter purple. You can use any light purple, to be honest. You just can judge it by looking at the bottle or the paint. You can experiment with whatever paint brand you have. And I just, again, lightly dry brush the cloak again and pick out all the folds and the creases. Then I use the same color, the deep purple, and this time I fill it with water, and then I just pick out the sharpest areas, or areas that might be a little bit too powdery, because sometimes when you dry brush it can be a bit rough. And so here, like, I'm picking out the folds just to make them more prominent. And this aspect is quite relaxing, to be honest. I actually enjoy this part. So now I'm trying Rattling Grime. I've never used this paint before, but it looks quite cool, and it's got a Skaven type name. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be like shiny and greasy, glossy, but luckily it's not. And it actually works really well over the Slap Chop and Garrick Sewer paint. It just adds a nice mid-tone to the whole dirty floor. Now I use Karak Stone, and I just dry brush. The paint is very thin, like there's not too much on the brush. You gotta be very careful about that. And I just dry brush all of the areas to catch all the cracked stone. And what I found out, again, there's purple on my paint. I'm sorry, there's purple on my brush. So it's kind of a nice effect. It's kind of like chaotic, but again, you might want to be careful between dry brushing. I use white, and I just fill in the water beneath, because later on I'm going to add some fluorescent paints. And then now I use some Hashut copper to paint the trim on all the ship. I guess it's a ship. Now I use Necro Gold, and this is kind of dry brushing, but there's more of my paint on my. I keep saying paint. There's more of my brush, and I just hit it like it's been scratched or dented, and I just try and pick out the highest areas. But then on some parts I make sure it's a bit thicker as well, like on the corners of the armor. And I also pick out these triangle things, ornaments I guess, on the cloak. There's quite a few of them, so just take your time. And if you make a mistake, you can get some water and then just wipe it and it'll come off really easily. And I also edge highlight or highlight the other metal areas as well, just to give them some separation. And also you've probably noticed that the model has been glued onto the base. So that it's been glued onto the base and the leg. So, you know, we're getting there. So again, I use a turquoise acrylic ink from Liquitex, and just like the purple robes, I chose blue for this one, a turquoise color. I wanted to go red and grey, just like the box art, but I just wanted to try something a bit different. Again, you can use contrast paints to go over this. Pterodon turquoise works pretty well, but it's a little bit darker than this one. Pterodon turquoise, you might need to add some contrast medium, and also use like a white color when you dry brush to get it ready for slap chopping. But this stuff goes on really well, and I just keep my brush light and I just smooth it around the model. I try not to go back and forth. It's very simple movements. I use sepia now over the wooden areas. This one you can use any kind of contrast paint. I'm thinking it's snakebite leather might be good. Should be snakebite leather. It's a very similar color. Or Cygor brown. That's good too. I also glue on parts of the staff as well. Now I found this paint in my stash, Imric Blue. I just thought I'd just try it out and dry brush the blue fabric I've just used the ink on. It's not bad. It's not the strongest color. Maybe I should have went for Temple Guard Blue. That's a really nice pop-in kind of color. But it's fine for now. Who knows, maybe later I'll try it. So now I'll use some silver. To be honest, any silver is fine. I really like to use scale 725, but you can use Vallejo or Citadel paints. I just paint the chainmail. Then I use Cadian flesh to paint this exposed skin underneath it. Black Legion, and I just paint all the rats that are around him. Because I paint them black because I want them to stand out a bit. Wrinkling Flesh Shade, just to go over all the exposed flesh. And you can even use it to kind of, as I did before with the purple, you can go over like the fingers or parts of his face or his tail and just add a bit of interest for it. I use Carrick Stone to paint the horns, and try not to miss those tiny little horns sticking out of his head. I was thinking you could probably paint them a darker color, or even like a warpstone crystal type color as well. It's up to you. It could be a bit creative. Then I use snakebite leather now. This part is quite simple. I'd usually use an airbrush for all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of fun to go back and try these other techniques, and I'll probably incorporate them into my future paint jobs too. So I put the snakebite leather, not all the way, just the most of the tip I guess. And I do this to all the horns. I make it nice and thick. Now I'm washing the paint off my brush, so it's just water now. And I'm kind of moving the paint around, see it's still a bit thick. So I wash it again, and then I use more water. And I just feather it now, and you can see here there's a nice transition between the dark and the light. So while the horns are drying, I use iron rack skin. Now I just paint the back of the blue fabric. This is the back part which should be glued on separately after gluing the two armor parts together. I just left that off just to make it easier. However, these parts I glued them on already, so but it's not too hard to be honest. And I also made sure I got the areas, what do you call it, the edges of the fabric. This to me, like, it adds a bit of interest and adds a bit of like something to look at, and it also separates the armor from the fabric as well. I use Vizzik Skour, again, I love this paint, to darken the tips of the horns. Again, I will make it thick on the tips, and then I'll wash my brush, and then I'll feather the rest of the paints to have a nice transition between the snakebite leather and the Vizzik Skour. As you can see now, I'm just using water to feather the brown. And if it gets a bit too thin, you can wait for it to dry and then reapply the brown again. So this is how they look. It's a really simple like technique, but it looks pretty awesome, and it looks like you've spent hours, but actually it's a few minutes. I use like a dark grey to dry brush the rats. I want to get these done before I glue on the head, because I won't be able to reach them later on. Then I use Fenrisian grey, which is just a lighter grey. I just try to get all the little features, like their heads and their ears and their little paws. And I also have a bit left on my brush. I just thought I'll try dry brushing the blue fabric and just see if it has a nice like edge highlights, but not, it's like a subtle highlight. It's not too strong, and it seems fine. It's not as eye-catching as Temple Guard Blue, but I'm happy with it. Now I use Luminous Flesh to dry brush the horns now. This is right before I glue it on, because I just want to make sure it's all done and I'm not going to overlap anything. So I do that, and then I use Corax White just to go over all the bone areas. There's some skulls hanging from his horns as well, and on his staff. And also I paint the warpstone shards. I think they're they're warpstone shards, and they're sticking out of his armor, and I'm just preparing them for the glowing paint later on. And then I use some brown contrast paint just to go over the fur and the nails, and just to add a bit of interest and difference to each part of the hair. I tried using this bright color, this contrast paint, for the straps, just to add a bit of interest again to the little trinkets around him. Then I use Hashut Copper just to cover all those areas. I use Cajun Flesh again to paint the tails of the mice or the rats. It's pretty simple. There's not too many rats, to be honest. I thought there would be hundreds, but I think there's only like 8. It's not that many for such a big model. Quite surprised. I used iron rack skin to paint the little spikes in his tail. I use Agrax Earthshade now to go over all the bone areas. I also paint over the armor as well, and the beard, and just I want to start adding some recessed shades into all parts of the model. When it comes to the horns, I actually thin it down quite a lot, and I just move it around and push it into the areas like where I need it to be. I also paint the base as well, and the rats, and just anywhere really. I even paint the bandages here. They've been dry brushed earlier of the skin color, but when you add Agrax over them, they kind of add like, it dulls them down a bit, so it becomes like a bandage type color, like an off-white kind of color. Yep. Now I'm using Screaming Skull just to pick out the tips of the horns, not the tips, the protruding edges of them, or the little, you know, nooks, because it looks a bit flat otherwise. And then what I do as well, I see some parts are a bit messy, so I go over them and I just paint over in the same direction as the horns, like the little, what are they called? Not rivets, the raised areas. Then I glue on the blade. The blade's just been dry brushed and painted Hashut copper, and then I've dry brushed it some Karak stone. The base also is Karak stone. I wanted to add some dust to it, and then I used this on the blade and some parts of the robe as well, and even on some parts of the rock that I might have missed. And you know, just pick out the model now and start adding a bit of dust here and there, make it look really used up. And also on the staff as well, it works pretty well on the wooden area. It just tidies up some of the areas that I might have missed earlier. This part you may want to skip, you don't have to. So I like using this panel liner from AK recently, and I thought I'd just try it and see how it looks when I use it into all the recesses of the fabric. And also I used it on the armor, but it didn't do too much. It was quite good on the stones and the rocks, but you could skip it. I don't think it really helped. This stuff really works well though on like gold models like Stormcast or Custodes, and you want to like add some interesting shadows. It's a really great paint to use. I have another video where I'm painting the new Stormcast, and I use this paint and I use this panel liner in that video too. I use Baroff Blue now. This is also from my stash. I haven't used it for a long time. I just use lots of water and then I just go over the model and I just apply this into the recesses of some area where water would have collected and rust would start to happen. So you can also use another paint called Nihilus Oxide from Games Workshop. That works just as well. Or any type of bright turquoise paint, and then you just thin it down with water and go over some of the metal areas. It really adds like a bit of character to the armor as well. That's the main reason why I did it. So now I use Mortarion Clear. It's like a green clear paint. You can use any kind of green paint, to be honest. And I just covered the paint, the blade, which has been dry brushed already, and you can see all that kind of interesting edge highlights been done for you. Now I use the fluorescent paint, and I just put that onto all the gems and also the water that's coming out of the ship. And I just put it on nice and thick, and then I just move it around, and I kind of dry brush with it. So what I do, I paint in the water first, the white area, and then with whatever paint I've got left, I kind of drag it across the bottom of the ship where it's closest to the water. This is how I would do OSL in the past before I had an airbrush. It works well. It's not too hard as well, and it's a good introduction as well if you want to start experimenting with some glows. You can add it to eyes or the lenses of helmets, or even the ruins as well. You can, like I'm doing here with the stone floor, I'm kind of going over the edges, so when it dries it has like a kind of glow. And I do the same thing here with the gems as well. I kind of go over the outline and then I thin it out a bit, and then once it dries it'll have like a nice OSL kind of glow to it. I use Dawn Yellow just to pick out the eyes. You can also use Ice Yellow as well from Vallejo and AK. It's a really nice color to use. Now I touch up the model now. This is Rakov Flesh. I'm just picking out all the details on the face, all the little lines, the eyebrows, some of the spots, and just really tidying up a bit now, because I wasn't too happy with it before. Now from this part of the video I'm going to be tidying up the horns and the face, and also starting to add some freehand to the model too. I use Luminous Flesh as well, just to further add highlights to the areas I've just painted. But this time I keep it a bit more minimal and just pick out the sharpest areas, like the ear lobes, the tips of the ears. As you can see here, I'm just picking out the areas that are catching the light. I use Berserker Bloodshade, and I just add a bit of redness to the nose where the horns are coming out, and inside the mouth as well. I also use it on the tail and just some areas where it might have been bruised earlier, like the knees perhaps. Just anywhere you think would be quite interesting, or somewhere that needs a bit of definition added to it. And especially inside the mouth. I even do the gums as well, these little teeth on the side. They're quite easy to miss. And I try and put some red paint around there as well. Also around the eyes a bit. He hasn't had much sleep, I guess. So I now begin the freehand. I'm no expert when it comes to freehand, so you have to forgive me when you see my drawings and my symbols here. I'm sure you could do much better than I could. But, you know, this is the best way to learn, I guess. So I'm going to try now to draw some symbols. I'm looking at the box art, but I'm also looking at some random symbols found on other Skaven models and flags. And I'm just making it up as well as I go along. But I've noticed Skaven there's a lot of like crosses, triangles, dots, the Nurgle, you know, the three dots, the three circles for pestilence. And yeah, just, you know, take time and make sure your brush is nice and sharp, and then also add a bit of water to the paints too. For the paints I'm using Deepkin Flesh because it's kind of a grey off-white color, and it's more interesting, I feel, than just using white or a grey. So take your time, and maybe you can tag me on Instagram when you finished yours at Sir Paints a Lot, and then or send me a message of how you've painted it. I would love to see your ideas and what you wrote, and yeah, it'd be quite cool to see actually. So feel free to let me know on Instagram. I use Deepkin Flesh as well, just to edge highlight all of this blue material around the model, around the neck. I still wasn't happy with the horns, so I've gone back to them with the Karak stone. And what I'm doing now, I'm glazing into the recesses, not the recesses, the deep ones, but more of the where the bone, the screaming skull, is touching the darker brown color. And what I'm doing, I'm using this as like a mid-tone, just to tidy up the horns a bit, because I don't like how it goes from bright screaming skull bone to like a dark brown. It looks a bit dirty and a bit off, doesn't look smooth. You can see in the middle it's a bit smooth looking, but the horn on the left, it's got too much brown. So I'm going to go over to that brown and then just glaze over it and just take my time and just tie them together. And I think it really made a difference. I'm much happier with the horns now. I've decided to use some snow on the base. I don't know why recently I've been really a fan of just adding snow to all my bases. I find it separates the model a bit from the base itself, and it adds a bit of interesting colors. As this model is quite dark and grungy, it's nice to have this base that kind of pops a bit and separates it just a little bit. Here's the finished model. So this took quite a while because I wasn't using airbrush, but it was worth it. I learned a lot, and I hope you found the video enjoyable too. In the description below, I've got a link to a store that they sell a bundle, and it has all the paints that I've used in this video. However, some of the paints are like equivalents. They're not the same, but they are more or less the same color. So you're welcome to go check out that and see if you like it. I really hope this video was useful for you guys, and please let me know of your thoughts, and I'd love to hear your feedback. And till next time, happy painting everyone. Goodbye.